Thank you for watching the second video on the breeding the lucipinnis. There was something in the videos, in the first video, that wasn't real clear, and I wanted to go ahead and discuss it briefly before we get started on this video. In this video, the first one and the one you've got coming up, you'll notice that I don't spend any time talking about what was the biggest issue with the Odessa breeding videos, and that was the issue of bacterial blooms, watching your feeding so that your water quality stays up, and keeping an eye on your water quality so that you make sure not to cause the water to become cloudy, which then uses up oxygen and causes you to lose your fry. So with the setup we've got going on here now, it's a very different situation. There are actually 3 places in this setup where there's water changes going on. And so you kind of want to keep those in mind and watch your water quality, and then you adjust the amount of water going into various places so that your water quality stays up. The first, of course, is the water that's going into the basket, and it's a very slow dribble. It's not a lot at a time, just enough to keep your water quality up over the fry and the new eggs. Because there's a ton of fry and a ton of eggs, and the eggs are going to start to fungus, the unfertilized eggs are, your water quality is going to suffer because of it. So you're going to want to adjust your water, the amount of water going into the basket to make sure that your water quality stays up. The second place where there's water changes going on is when the lower right-hand tank is pumping water from the sump up into the breeder and the young tank. And when the eggs are first put into the methylene blue in the breeder tank, I turn that tank off. It doesn't get any water changes for the first 3 or 4 days. Then as soon as I start feeding brine shrimp, then I start going ahead and having water come up from the sump into the tank, into the breeder tank, to go ahead and keep the water quality up. At first I start off at a half hour at a time, 4 or 5 times a day, and then gradually increase it, so that by the time they're done, like this last batch, when they got to be about 7 or 8 weeks old, I was able to have the water turning around pretty much 24/7. But at first, I start off at like a half hour, 4 or 5 times a day. Then after about a week and a half, 2 weeks, I'll kick it up to an hour, 5 to 6 times a day, and then I'll leave it at that for the remainder of the time going out. The third place where there's water changes going on is the actual tap water, the actual fresh water that's coming into the system. And with this 3-tank system, the only one that gets that water is that lower right-hand tank. And when that gets its 10 to 15% daily water changes, which at first I do it about every other day because I don't want to have too much fresh water going in, but usually after about a week, when the young get about a week under their belts, then I'll go ahead and start doing the water changes on a regular daily basis, like the rest of the room gets, of 10 to 15% at a time. Then the water that goes into that bottom right-hand sump, it gets totally diluted and dispersed. When it gets pumped up into the breeder and the young tanks, then the fish in the tanks don't even notice that it's new water. But the effect is that their water is cleaner, and that's to their liking. So anyway, I hope that kind of explains it out. It's just a case of watching your water quality and watching, the amount of water changing that you're doing, keeping it to a minimum because this fish doesn't like fresh water, but still keeping it at enough so that you don't run into bacterial problems. So anyway, I hope that helps. Enjoy the video. So I've turned the air off so you can see the new fry as they're hatching. As I mentioned, they don't like light, so you shine the light on them and it usually causes them to swim around a little bit. I try not to do this too often. You always want to go in and take a look at them, but you have to be aware that you don't want to do them any harm or make them any more uncomfortable than they need to be. This is about the second day after hatching. They're probably still on yolk sac. I am putting the frozen brine shrimp in the mornings, and then I add a little bit of the sterile microfood in the evenings. See, they are pretty tiny. I've just put some of the frozen baby brine shrimp into here. Now the reason I feed frozen brine shrimp and not live brine shrimp is because when frozen, the nutritional value, yeah, it might be compromised a little bit, but it sinks to the bottom, so it's right there at the bottom where the young can get to it. If you have live baby brine shrimp that are swimming around in the water column, the fry will never get to them. So this way, the food is right there, and with the water quality being kept up, then it shouldn't deteriorate to the point where it would affect the fry. So that's what I've been doing. It's been working so far. We're now into, this is about 2 days later, and you can see the fry now starting to become easier to notice. I just fed some frozen shrimp. Try not to have the light be right on them. Let's see if oh, they're looking down here. So now they're basically being fed 2 to 3 times a day. Definitely in the morning, definitely at night, sometimes in the afternoon. I've been giving them the frozen shrimp in the morning. And then they get the micron Sarah food in the afternoon and in the evening. And I also have started to turn on the valve here and running some water into the tank to go ahead and flush out the last of the methylene blue water in this tank. The best way to do it actually is just to drain it out into another bucket, because when you just flush it out the way I was just doing, then you end up getting the other tanks that it's hooked up to blue also. And then of course we're adding water in every day from the water system, so it eventually flushes its way out. But it doesn't seem to bother the new young, but I do want to try and get it out within 2 to 3 days. This container is not perfect. It has a couple flaws that come up each spawn, and they usually result in the fry getting out. Now I've got the air to it turned off right now so we can see it on the camera, but normally it would be plugged in and running out of this outlet there. But some of the young have managed to get out of this container, get back behind the sponge, and I don't know if they can be seen. I'm going to try to bring it in a little bit. But they like to hide out in the dark areas of the tank. There's actually quite a few young down in through here. So I made sure when I make sure when I'm feeding, but I also put food down there as well. When you do change the water in this tank to flush out the methylene blue, keep in mind that the Synodontis is really, really sensitive to water changes. Any changes in the water, any addition of water that's foreign, they really don't like, for instance, having raw tap water added to their tank. So when you do add water to a tank like this, you just want to make sure to do it gradually and not put in more than maybe about 5% at a time. So what I do is I just put on the spigot to run into here, trickle into here, for just about 5 or 10 minutes. And then I'll do that maybe once or twice a day. The reason that the snails were left in here is that the snail excrement produces a lot of infusoria. And this is what the baby Synodontis feed on. So once the eggs have hatched, the snails are of no harm to the baby Synodontis. So not that I want the tank overrun with snails, but I don't go to a great effort to disturb the new Synodontis fry by removing the snails at this point. So I was getting concerned because I didn't have many young in the basket. And it turns out that they were all underneath the sponge. Many in the tank are doing fine, so I lifted the sponge up. And underneath here, as you can see, are a couple hundred fry. So the sponge may need a little bit more refinement. But you can see they survived, they did well. I'm going to leave the sponge up, let them swim out of the container. I've been feeding the whole tank anyway, and I'll continue to do so, and feed the container up here as well. But one problem with this tank right now is that this container here is still here. There's still a number of young in here. But they're eating really well, they're growing really quickly. And one thing to keep in mind is that in this 20-gallon breeder tank, that with that container sitting in the top, it's using up about half of the available oxygenation room at the surface of the water. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this right now and let these young out. So that, well anyway, we'll go ahead and get this started and I'll come right back to you. So the basket's removed, debris still in the air, everybody's settling down. And one of the things I thought a lot about, if they had their way, if it were up to them, there would be a clump of Java fern in the middle of this tank, or a bunch of Java fern, and they would all be tightly up against the stem of the plant, because they really like to be in that kind of situation when they're at this size, and for the next couple of months. The problem with that is that they do tend to push themselves up into a really tight ball in the middle of this plant. They fight for the plant, their whole effort comes to that. Whereas without the plant, they're spending their time cruising the bottom looking for food, which as young fry I would much rather have them doing. So I'll add plants into the tank in another, maybe a month or so, but at this point I don't seem to lose any fry when they're exposed to the open like this. I can keep a close eye on them, and I know that everyone is eating. Okay, these guys, they'll be 3 weeks old tomorrow. So they're coming along. Numbers are still good. I haven't seen any dead ones or anything like that. I don't have reason to believe I've lost many of them. They've settled into a schedule of receiving frozen baby brine shrimp in the mornings and the evenings, and then the Cero microfood in the afternoons. But they're all doing very well. One of the things that comes up often when I first bred these is everyone believed that they were parasitic, or not parasitic, but cannibalistic to one another. And particularly at this age. At first, it was easy to believe that because you would see losses of numbers, or what you thought by eye was a decrease in the number of fish that you had. And I think it's got more to do with feeding and with how well you're keeping them, what the conditions are like, than whether or not you're actually losing any. Certainly whether or not they're eating one another. Now you can believe this because there are other species in the genus that are heavily cannibalistic toward one another. The Scyphia multipunctata, they're awful. But these guys, I don't believe are cannibalistic. I can't really say that I see it. If it happens, it's at such a level that it's fairly minor. And you can see they're doing well. So usually when they're about 5 weeks old, they're ready to be split up into other tanks for the This might be a better shot of them here. They've eaten, and they will tend to group around the darker areas of the tank. And you can see it how big they are here at 3 weeks. So it's over here. A few over here. A little bit of coloration coming in. This is the batch about 5 days later. They're just prowling around at the moment. I'll go ahead and get some brine shrimp in here. And you'll see them all come out. They'll be a month old in 3 days. Since the last time I filmed 4 or 5 days ago, I have added an air stone just for a little bit of insurance there. As they get bigger and they're eating more. And so now I have it doing a water change into this tank for a half hour, 6 times a day. We still appear to be on track for 150 to 200 fry. And there haven't been really any deaths. At least not since the first week. And as you can see, they're all doing really well. You can begin to see some color on them. Let's see if we can close in a little bit here. So the bigger ones are getting some markings. Every once in a while at this stage I'll see one that's all white and I'll get all excited. But usually they get, the color comes back in and they end up looking just like every other fish. So at this point in time, when their color comes in and how it comes in, doesn't really say much about how it's going to look when it becomes an adult. Normally, in about another 3-4 days, they'll be big enough to split up into their own tanks. I'm going to go ahead and leave them in here so we can follow their growth for a little longer. And to watch how they develop over the next couple of weeks. And I'll take them until they develop their adult coloration. Right now the color that they're going to develop is going to look very different than they will as adults. Right now they'll be a splotchy brown, black, tan kind of a mix. And their eventual color will be very different. Here's that group, and they're now, this is a week later, and they'll be 5 weeks old tomorrow. I don't believe that any have died. So they're coming along quite well. It's important to keep in mind that at this point they're in the midst of their juvenile coloration. This isn't how they're going to look as adults. I'll show you a little bit later here how they will color out. But this blotchy black and white markings, so if I can get a close-up here, those will disappear. The black dots will be, the black markings will become dots, and the background will lighten up a little bit. There's quite a bit of variability in the young, so you can pick and choose for various traits. Even though the generation time is over 2 years for these guys, you can get a pretty wide representation of their genome with each batch. There's a pretty high white guy there. Curious to see how that one turns out. One appears to have black eyes, so it's not an albino. But we'll see how it grows out. Pretty active little guys. Lots of personality. At about the 4 to 5 month point, the adult coloration comes in, where you start getting the well-defined spotting and the white background. But the color that they are now at the 5 weeks, 6 weeks point is very different than this. And here's that final batch. Each one of these tubs has 25 in it. So there's 206 that came out of this batch. Thank you for watching this video on the breeding the Synodontis lucipinnis. If you have any questions or there's some things that didn't make sense or that you'd like to have explained further, go ahead and write me at selectaquatics@gmail.com. I have a number of videos coming up down the road, a few surprises down the road, so I hope to get the next one out here in the next 2-3 weeks. The next video is going to be on my aquarium book collection here and talking about which books are great and that I use all the time and which books that I in 30 years have never opened. So possibly to better inform your choice of which books to buy when you're looking for books to help you with the hobby. So thank you very much, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.